Intrusive thoughts are a tricky problem that you can encounter, especially during recovery from porn addiction, where you have these unwanted thoughts that just seem to pop into your head from out of nowhere. And what's especially tricky about it is that it seems like the harder you try to do something about this problem, the harder you try to fight against these intrusive thoughts, the more of them you have. In fact, intrusive, unwanted, overly sexual thoughts are one of the few things that can actually get worse during your recovery. So what you would expect is, okay, I've quit porn. I'm maybe a week free, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right? I'm staying clean. And you're noticing all kinds of positive effects. You're noticing that you're feeling better. You notice that you have fewer urges. You maybe feel more focused. All kinds of positive effects would happen as you expect. But it seems that the longer you stay clean, the worse this situation with intrusive thoughts gets. And today we're going to look at exactly why that is and how to deal with it. What I'm going to explain here applies to every kind of intrusive thought, all kinds of thoughts that you would rather not think. They all happen for the same reason and they all have the same solutions. But I'm going to talk about it specifically in the context of recovering from porn addiction. Now, with this specifically, I recommend that you don't skip ahead. I will put chapter links in the description here, but I recommend that you don't skip ahead because a part of the solution is actually listening to and understanding the explanation I'm about to give. So by the end of this podcast episode, you'll understand exactly why that is and why it's worth sticking around and listening basically to the whole thing from start to finish. So let's get right into it. First, briefly to define what is actually happening. So when you use porn a lot, when you use it excessively, one of the things that happens is something that we call porn brain, which is like your brain becomes pornified and you tend to have this thing happen where you are always looking for that sexual stimulation. And you might find that as you're going about your day, you are like in your mind undressing strangers you see on the street, for example. Or maybe you're interacting with someone and you suddenly maybe you get images, you imagine what it would be like to have sex with that person. And this is a porn brain phenomenon. So essentially, you're training your brain to get that rewarding feeling from sexual stimuli. And then your brain starts looking for that stimulus in your everyday life. So that can create sexual thoughts and unwanted spontaneous sexual thoughts. And for some people, this gets really, really serious. It can become obsessive even while you're in your addiction. In fact, for some people, this is the reason they want to quit. They realize that this is like affecting their brain in a way that's really not good. And so they realize, okay, all this porn use isn't good for me. And they decide to quit. However, it is also possible that you don't experience these types of sexual thoughts and this type of over-sexualization while you're using porn, but then it hits you when you quit. And of course, that can be quite frustrating. You think like I said, this is supposed to get better, right? Things are supposed to get better when I stay clean. But here are these intrusive thoughts that keep popping into your mind, and it keeps getting worse and worse. So what the hell is going on here? Part of this is a totally normal part of the recovery process. Think of it like this. If you eat a lot of sugary foods, let's say you always have some candy during the day as a snack, you always have a dessert after dinner, and then at some point you decide, hey, this is really bad for me, I'm going to quit sugar. And sugar, just like pornography, is very addictive. So when you stop having sugar, you will feel withdrawals. You will feel strong urges and cravings for sugary foods. And guaranteed, if every day you have a dessert after dinner and then you suddenly stop, you will feel strong cravings after dinner every day for a while. Even if you stay clean, you might be 3 or 4 weeks clean of sugar and you still feel that after dinner, I kind of want to get something sweet because you're so used to it and because your brain craves that dopamine hit. It craves that reward that comes from eating sugary foods. Now, in this case, it would be totally normal that you go about your day, you're sugar-free, and thoughts of, fantasies of donuts and cakes and stuff pop into your mind. So you just randomly feel like, ooh, a donut would be nice right now. And that thought just comes up. It's because your brain is seeking that hit. So this type of thought of, wouldn't it be nice to get the thing that I was addicted to and that I've now quit, is a totally normal part of recovering from any addiction. So if you've quit sugar addiction for the first few weeks, you would probably fantasize, maybe you'd even dream about chocolate cake or something like that. Totally normal. And if you quit porn addiction, you'll probably have thoughts about pornographic stuff, and you might even have pornographic dreams. Again, totally normal. Your brain is just trying to get the fix that it's used to. The thing is, if you quit sugar and you have intrusive thoughts about chocolate cake, you probably wouldn't judge yourself for that. You probably would be like, oh, too bad, I'm not going to have chocolate cake right now. It's fine. And then over time, after a few weeks, after a few months, you just wouldn't think about all this sugary food and candy anymore. And that is like your brain resetting to the new normal of no sugar. And in this actually lies the key to why the intrusive thoughts stick around. There is this principle that I've talked about in other content called what you resist persists. Which means the harder you try to push something away, the harder you try to resist something, the more it sticks around, the more of it you keep getting. There are two reasons why this happens. The first is that you cannot actively not think of something. So if I tell you, do not think of a polar bear wearing a baseball cap, and especially don't think of a polar bear wearing a blue baseball cap, what happens? Your mind, in some way or another, maybe even just for an instant, produces an image of a polar bear wearing a baseball cap because you can't not think of that. You can only actively think of things. And in the same way, an attempt to not think pornographic thoughts creates pornographic thoughts. So this is part of what explains this phenomenon of what you resist persists. If you're trying to not think these thoughts, if you're trying to resist these thoughts, you get more of them. However, there's a second factor that's even more important, and it has to do with the emotions that go along with the intrusive thoughts. And there is, again, a biological explanation for this. This is just how the brain works, and there's good reasons why the brain works like this for evolutionary reasons. Basically, whenever you feel emotions, that is a way for your brain to prioritize. So think about it like this. All day long, you're getting loads and loads of input, right? You're getting all kinds of sensory input. You're seeing lots of things. You're reading lots of things. You're meeting people, and so on and so forth. And in fact, you're getting way more sensory input than what you are aware of at any given time. So most of the time, your brain is filtering out almost everything that's coming in. So for example, pay attention to your feet right now. Do your feet feel warm or cold? Maybe are you wearing shoes? Do they feel tight? Do you feel pressure on your feet if you're standing or walking? Now that I've asked you to pay attention to that, you're aware that there is information coming from your feet. So perhaps you notice, oh, my feet are cold. But until I mentioned this, you weren't thinking about your feet. You were not aware of your feet. They were already cold or warm or tight or whatever it is, but your brain was filtering that out. Like the signal was coming through, but your brain was going, this isn't important. We're not paying attention to this. It's only once I mentioned your feet that you start consciously paying attention to the signal that was there all along. So in this way, the brain is constantly filtering out almost everything that comes in. And it's trying to make a decision about what is important, what isn't. And also, most of the things that happen most days, you forget about for the same reason. Your brain is not going to store absolutely everything you experience and see and hear in long-term memory. That'd be very wasteful. So instead, it has to always prioritize. Your brain has to have a way to decide what is important. What should we pay attention to? What do we store in memory? And emotions are one of the ways it does that. Imagine this. Imagine that you're a caveman. You leave your cave and go search for food. Now you're walking around and you're seeing all kinds of stuff. You're seeing some dirt on the ground. You're seeing some grass. You're seeing some rocks. And none of this elicits any emotion. So that tells your brain none of this is very important, right? You're not going to see a rock and be amazed at it or anything like that because the rock is just normal and you expect to see the rock when you walk around. So that is all the kind of stuff that you're perceiving and that will get filtered out. This is not important, not important, not important. Now imagine that you come across a bush with ripe berries and there you see that and it elicits emotions. You'll probably be happy and delighted and positively surprised. And these emotions are a signal to your brain that says, this is important. We should remember this. We should remember where this bush is. We should maybe remember how do we get here so we can come back to it later. We should remember what are the surroundings like, all this kind of stuff, right? So that the positive emotion you feel upon encountering the bush and upon eating the berries and tasting how sweet they are, this elicits positive emotions. And that's a signal to your brain that says, this is important. Now, imagine that a little bit later, you suddenly hear a rustling and you see a tiger lurking in the bush. This elicits even stronger emotions. This elicits massive fear and a fight or flight response. So you run for your life, you get out of there. And assuming that you don't get eaten by the tiger, right? Assuming you make it back to your cave and back to safety, this is an even stronger signal. The fear, the negative emotion is the strongest signal. This tells your brain this is super important because your brain is trying to make sure that it learns everything it can about this situation so that you don't become a tiger lunch in the future. So for evolutionary reasons, this is why negative emotions are a stronger signal than positive emotions, because for your survival, it is more important that you don't get eaten by a tiger than that you eat sweet-tasting berries. Okay, so all this explains how emotions are like a signal that sets the priority of stuff happening, and it determines what your brain focuses on and what your brain remembers. So let's bring this back to intrusive thoughts. If you're going about your day and you're having an intrusive thought, an intrusive sexual or pornographic thought, and then it elicits emotions, negative emotions, that is a signal to your brain that says, this is important, we should remember this. And if you have intrusive thoughts a lot, guaranteed you are assigning negative emotions to those thoughts. So you might feel shame. You might judge yourself and feel like, oh no, I shouldn't be having these thoughts. Maybe you even feel like this is sinful. So if in a religious context, if you feel like you're sinning by having these thoughts, that is assigning a very strong negative value to this. That makes it very hard to let go of these thoughts. But even if you don't have this, you might feel shame, you might feel guilt, you might also worry. So you might worry that, oh my God, this means something's wrong with me. You might be afraid, you might feel fear that having these thoughts will lead you to relapse. And then you might have secondary worries and fears. If you're thinking, oh no, having these thoughts means that I'm somehow not making progress in my recovery from porn addiction. And if I don't recover from porn addiction, then I'm not going to succeed in life, or I'm never going to find a partner. Or if you have a partner, my partner is going to leave me. So you can add a lot of stories and a lot of negative emotions on top of the intrusive thoughts that are happening. You can think of it like charging up these thoughts with emotional energy. The more you worry about them, the more you have negative feelings like shame and fear about them, the more you are telling yourself stories about what it means that you're having these thoughts, and the more you're trying not to have these thoughts, the more you're charging these thoughts up with emotional energy. And the more charged they are, the more frequently they will happen, the more often you will have them, and the more you will struggle. Because again, every time this happens, you're telling your brain, this is important, this is important, this is important. You're telling your brain to remember this, to store this in long-term memory. You're basically telling your brain, give me more of this. So that is the situation with intrusive thoughts. Let's summarize. First of all, having such thoughts is a completely normal part of recovering from porn addiction or any other addiction. Like we said, right, you might fantasize about chocolate if you're quitting sugar. So this is totally normal. Second, trying not to have these thoughts makes you have the thoughts, just like trying not to think of a polar bear wearing a blue baseball cap produces exactly that image in your mind. And third, adding negative emotions and stories that elicit negative emotions to those intrusive thoughts charges them up with emotional energy and makes them stronger and more common. So this is exactly why you get this effect where it feels like the harder you try to fight against it, the more you get of this problem. So now you understand why this is happening. Let's talk about solutions. How do you solve the problem of intrusive thoughts? The first step is to simply realize and internalize everything I've explained here, because this discharges the negative emotion. When you truly understand that this is just a normal part of the recovery process, when you truly understand that having intrusive thoughts, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're not recovering the way you should. It doesn't mean any of those things. It's just a totally normal thing. The more you understand that, the less you will be fearful and shameful and so on when you have such thoughts. So this is why I said in the beginning, don't skip, right? Don't skip past the explanation, because understanding this explanation is maybe the biggest part of the solution. So much so that you might want to re-listen to this. Okay, if this is a problem you struggle with, it might be a good idea for you to just listen to this episode again and maybe listen to it, several times to really let these ideas sink in and to give yourself like a counter story, right? If the story in your mind is, oh my God, this is a big problem, this means I'm doing something wrong, here is the counter to that story. And really let this sink in. That is a big part of the solution. And for some people, this might be enough. I'm basically giving you permission right here to just relax about this. And the more you relax about it, the less you will have this problem. Second solution, you can do this a bit more actively as well. And you do that by bringing awareness to the moments when you're having these intrusive thoughts. When you have an intrusive thought, first of all, notice that it's happening. Notice, oh, this is happening in my mind. This thought has popped into my mind. And notice, what kinds of feelings am I feeling right now? And you can use the embodiment method that you can learn more about if you join my newsletter, by the way. There's also other content about this. The embodiment method is basically you drop into your body. So you notice, intrusive thoughts. I'm starting to worry about this. And you go, what does that feel like in my body? What does it feel like in my body right now? And you just, without trying to change it, you just let your body experience this, and by paying attention to what's happening without judging it, without trying to change it, it just slowly dissipates. Now, this is a very, very powerful thing to do, but it's quite difficult for some people because awareness is basically a muscle. Awareness is a skill you can develop. And if you find what I just explained to be difficult, it's probably because you just don't have a strong enough awareness muscle. So you don't have the skill yet of catching yourself in the moment and making a deliberate choice, right? You just get carried away in your worry and anxiety. Again, that's totally normal. Most of us have never practiced our awareness skill deliberately. But the good news is you can practice that skill. And this is the third tip I have for you. Use introspective writing to build your awareness muscle. So introspective writing is a way to essentially put your thoughts onto the page and also put your feelings onto the page, which helps you become more aware of them. So an example of this would be you feel the intrusive thought come up, and either in that moment, if you have the opportunity to, or later that day, you write about it. And you write down exactly what happened. So you write down, where were you? And what thought appeared. So you describe the thought, and then you write down, how did I feel about this, and what stories do I tell myself about this? So you might write something like, today I was walking on the street and I saw an attractive looking stranger, and I noticed that in my mind, I started undressing her. I started imagining what she looked like naked. I started imagining her in kind of pornographic scenarios. And then how do I feel about it? What happened next? So then I noticed I started feeling anxious about it. I noticed that I'm tensing up, some tension in my shoulders and my neck as I'm almost trying to flinch away from these thoughts. And then I noticed that I started to worry about, oh no, does this mean I'm not really recovering? Am I going to relapse? Am I going to have porn brain forever? And you write down all of this, right? You write it down as it comes up, as honestly as possible. And this helps you be aware. This helps you be aware of what's actually happening inside your mind instead of kind of just getting carried away with. To learn more about how to do introspective writing, check out the first link in the description where you can sign up to the Quit by Healing newsletter. And in this newsletter, I give you a crash course on how to beat this addiction, including I will link you to a completely free introspective writing course. It's just a little crash course on how to do introspective writing with a few specific recommendations and exercises. Like I said, this is the most effective and fastest way that I have discovered for building that awareness muscle that helps you catch yourself before you get carried away in these thoughts and helps you tune in and just let these thoughts and feelings dissolve. One of my clients had this problem in a big way. So he was really struggling with these kinds of intrusive thoughts, even though he was doing great in his recovery. And he'd been clean from porn for a long time. He was doing great in all other aspects of his recovery. But even at a later stage in his recovery, he was struggling with lots of very specific, really unwanted intrusive thoughts like this. And the steps that I've just walked you through is what helped him overcome this problem. As he himself put it, he had to learn to give fewer fucks. He was giving too many fucks about what was happening in his mind instead of just treating it as a random thought that pops up and it doesn't really matter. This type of thought made him worried and made him anxious and made him afraid, and that's why he kept having it. So he had to learn to basically stop trying to fight against it and stop worrying about it too much. And through all of the things I've explained here, that's exactly what he did. And he got to the point where it's like, yeah, this just doesn't bother me anymore. And the less he bothers about it, the fewer fucks he gives about having intrusive thoughts, the less commonly they occur. I also want to tell you a little bit of my story with this specific problem. I never had this problem. I never had the problem of intrusive thoughts. And I'll tell you why. It's because I never judged myself for it. Let me be more specific about this. I definitely had a lot of shame around my porn use and even around just my normal sexuality, my normal sexual desires filled me with a lot of shame. And for me, that was the main reason why I got addicted to porn in the first place. Well, once I recognized that my porn use was a real problem and I decided to quit, I decided to do something about it, I never had this problem of intrusive thoughts because I realized, because I had already done a lot of work to heal my shame and to gain self-acceptance and self-forgiveness over many years, even before I decided to quit porn. And so when it came time for me to quit porn, I didn't judge myself for any of this. I didn't judge myself for having intrusive thoughts, for having sexual thoughts whenever I did have them, which wasn't very often. And now you know why, right? Because I didn't judge myself, because I didn't get all emotional, because I didn't worry, these thoughts didn't happen very often. And in fact, I never judged myself for any of this. Once I realized what was going on, I don't judge myself for the fact that I was a porn addict for many years. I don't judge myself. I don't judge my younger self for having become addicted to this because he didn't know any better. He was just a kid. I don't judge myself for having sexual desires. I don't judge myself for having sometimes inappropriate sexual desires. And because I don't judge myself for it, it almost never happens. So in other words, because I removed all the negative emotions and all the negative stories from this, I never really had this problem to begin with. Because the way I see it, you will sometimes randomly have sexual thoughts pop into your head. Look, that's what the mind does. The mind produces thoughts, mostly random, all day long and also all night long, right? Even at night, your mind is still producing thoughts, and we call that dreaming. And many of these thoughts, like some of these thoughts are useful and wise and intelligent, but most of them are silly and random and basically nonsense. Our mind basically constantly produces noise, and for the most part, we don't take it very seriously. So look, as you go about your day, you might randomly have a thought about pizza, and that's fine. And you might randomly have a thought about something sexual. And that's also fine. My personal experience is that, yes, I sometimes think about pizza, and yes, I sometimes think about sex. But both of these occasions are neutral to me. I don't judge myself for it. And also, both of them happen rarely. Yes, it happens every once in a while, but pretty rarely, because most of the time, I'm just busy thinking about other stuff. So that is everything you need to know about unwanted intrusive thoughts and the somewhat paradoxical way in which you can solve this problem. Let me add one more thing, which is that this can be a bit tricky because you have to learn to let go. But that skill of letting go is an extremely valuable skill. So if this is a problem you struggle with, look at this as a great opportunity to learn a fantastically useful mind skill. The skill of being able to understand how the brain works, first of all, and understand how you can let go of things instead of clinging on to them and adding all this emotion to them, is a fantastically useful skill that will serve you well throughout the rest of your life. So this is your opportunity to practice that and really master a mind tool that most people will never even learn about. If you have any questions about this, go ahead and leave a comment. You can comment on the YouTube version of this podcast episode, and I try to read and respond to all of the comments. Also, if you have any kind of feedback or you have suggestions for topics you'd like me to cover in future videos, go ahead and leave those in a comment. Make sure to subscribe. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app. And you can find it by just typing in Quit by Healing. And like I mentioned before, you can find a newsletter sign-up form if you click on the first link in the description. And when you join the newsletter, I will give you free access to my introspective writing crash course, as well as to the Quit by Healing shadow work course. So all you have to do is sign up for the newsletter. It's completely free. And I've put together loads of useful resources for you to help in your journey of quitting porn and becoming the master of your own destiny. That is all for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.